Hello everyone, this is Dr. Shelley Plumb. I would like to welcome you all back to From the Hip. I am here today with Eric Romano. He is from Romano Law Group. How are you, Eric?
Doing just fine, thank you. How are you?
Great, great. So what is your specialty in law?
I am a general litigation trial attorney,
Yes.
specializing in personal injury and wrongful death litigation and criminal defense.
You know what, it's funny you're talking, and that is a really important specialty. And one thing that is jumping to mind, and I know we had talked about it before, is the incidence of overdoses in today's society. Do you see that in your practice, cases related to that overdose?
I do. I see it quite a bit, and one of the interesting things about my practice is there's a tremendous overlap between the personal injury work and the criminal defense work, because we see a little bit of it coming from both sides. In the personal injury work, what I see is a lot of clients that suffer severe injuries. They then are prescribed pain medication to help treat the pain. And sometimes that the use of the pain medication goes a little longer than expected, sometimes a little longer than necessary. They become tolerant, which sometimes leads to addiction.
That's true, yes.
The occasional overdose.
So do you taking that just a step further, do you see that translating into, for example, accidents that are out there, auto accidents or accidents in general?
I do. I can give you one example from a recent case, a young man in his 20s that had suffered a severe work-related injury, went to the hospital, had a couple of surgeries. As a result of that, to help manage the pain, he was prescribed some opioid pain medication. That ultimately grew into an addiction. Okay. To the point where he was taking more and more, getting prescriptions that he wasn't supposed to have. Right. Ultimately took too many one day, got behind the wheel, went out and caused a fatal car accident. Oh,
that's just devastating, and that's something that I'm sure can be prevented, don't you think?
Absolutely.
Yes. From a physician standpoint, when we have patients that are in pain, it is hard not to prescribe the pain medication. Do you see, in your personal opinion, are people overdoing the prescriptions, or, what do you see? What is the trend?
Well, I think there's a couple of things going on. First of all, there seems to have been greater social acceptance in recent years of taking drugs or medications to treat just about anything.
Right.
You turn on the TV now, you watch any sort of program, seems like half the commercials you see are for drugs.
You know what, it rings true, because I'll be honest with you, I watch an hour of TV, it's in the end of the day, and I'll tell you what, every single commercial is a pharmaceutical company.
Right.
Yes. So you think that's the case? People are defaulting more to medications than they are to, say, the root of the problem?
Well, I think that's part of it. I think people in general are kind of have this message now that's been kind of the result of more aggressive marketing by the pharmaceutical companies. But there's greater awareness and kind of this, I think, more of a cultural acceptance that there's a drug to fix anything now.
Right.
And whether you have pain, whether it's depression, whether it's memory loss, whether it's blood pressure, whatever it is, the default reaction seems to be there's a pill for that.
Right, right. And that rings true, because there was actually an alarming statistics that you shared with me before we got on set here, right?
Right.
And can you share that with our viewers?
Sure. Well, the United States accounts for about 5% of the world's population, but we account for more than 80% of the world's opioid use. Opioids, of course, being essentially the class of drugs that make up most pain medications.
That is true. That is true. Now, that is, and I, doing my own research, I have found similar statistics really equating overdoses, deaths from overdoses, to almost the incidence of car accidents. Do you see that in your practice?
I do, and I'm familiar with some of those same articles and the data that we keep up with.
Right.
And I know that just since the year 2000, over 44,000 people have died from opioid-related overdoses. Now, these are accidental overdoses
Right.
from people addicted to or abusing pain medications.
Right.
And most of those overdoses or the abusive use of them
Yes.
Usually starts with somebody who's got an injury or an illness.
Right.
They start off with a legitimate, valid prescription from a doctor.
Right.
But because their tolerance then builds up, they need to take more and more pills to treat the same level of pain. And it's a gradual progression towards dependence and addiction, which often then leads to the accidental overdose.
I see. So, pain medication is one thing. There's the narcotics. One of the hot topics I know that you know about is medical marijuana, and there is so much controversy surrounding medical marijuana. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, no question, a very controversial topic.
Yes.
And something I've had discussions with a lot of people for many years. It is, of course, it still remains illegal under federal law.
Right.
But as most of us know, many states around the country have, in recent years, made it at least partially legal.
May I stop you just one second?
Sure.
And as a person with no law background, obviously, I don't understand how it can be not okay from a federal standpoint, but be okay from a state standpoint. Can you explain that?
Sure. It's awfully complicated, but I'll try to give kind of the nutshell version.
Okay.
Congress sets law, of course, that applies to all 50 states and territories. Many years ago, Congress included marijuana as one of these, as a drug or controlled substance that is unlawful to grow, possess, or use.
Right.
Which of course includes selling, distributing, etc. However, each of the states can kind of experiment with what they think is appropriate within their own state borders.
Okay.
And so what has happened is states, I think starting several years ago, with Washington and Colorado, probably the two most well-known, which legalized marijuana for recreational purposes as well as medicinal purposes. Congress has essentially leaves to the states the ability to kind of decide what they're going to allow within their own states.
Okay.
And sometimes you end up with a conflict between state law and federal law, which is what we've got here.
Right, and I'm sure you deal with that.
Right.
So, for people out there, who are wondering, and this is me as well, is there, and have you seen, and I don't know the answer to that, is there a correlation between these states, states out there that are using marijuana either for medicine or as recreational? Is there any data that shows any accidental injuries or, accidents from usage?
Well, I don't know the data offhand. I did look at one law review article earlier this year suggesting that the number of car accidents related to marijuana in the state of Washington has increased significantly since that state passed or legalized recreational use of marijuana.
Right.
Now, that may be only because they've started keeping track of whether marijuana is related or is involved in accidents or not.
Yes.
So it's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily correlate to an increased use. The increased numbers may simply be a result of increased data tracking.
Okay, I understand. So going forward, is there, in your opinion, how should we track that correlation between them? Because we are going to, the symptoms from medical marijuana, or marijuana in general, are what? Can you explain to our viewers what the symptoms are for marijuana? Is it very similar to being under the influence of alcohol, for example?
Similar in many ways.
Okay.
And when I was a prosecutor, I often prosecuted DUI cases in which marijuana or other drugs were involved.
Okay.
And marijuana causes drowsiness, sometimes can cause confusion. In many ways, inhibits one's or impairs one's driving ability, very similar to alcohol and other drugs.
Okay, it does.
It does.
All right. So is it safe to say that when the legal alcohol, where you're considered under the influence, you can achieve that same degree with marijuana?
You can, and it's measured a little bit differently
Okay.
because under Florida law,
Right.
to be guilty of driving under the influence, if it's alcohol related, then of course we're familiar with the blood alcohol level.
Right.
But there are two ways to convict somebody of driving under the influence in an alcohol related case.
Yes.
And that is if the defendant's normal faculties are impaired, or is under the influence of alcohol to the extent his or her normal faculties are impaired, or if he or she has a blood or breath alcohol level above 0.08.
Okay.
Now, you can't quite measure the quantity of marijuana or other controlled substances in the blood,
Right.
but that same standard applies in that if you're under the influence of marijuana or any other controlled substance, you are guilty of driving under the influence if the evidence establishes that you are under the influence of that controlled substance to the extent your normal faculties are impaired.
Right, right. That's interesting. That is fascinating. So one thing, in looking at your website, the Romano Law Group, one thing that really stuck out to me is that you are all about creating awareness. Am I right in
Right.
saying that? And so with regards to prescription drugs in general, the narcotics, and also marijuana use, what words of advice would you give to viewers with regards to consumption and awareness?
Well, certainly be informed.
Yes.
I think for those people that have suffered an injury or an illness and either are under medical care or considering medical care, I think just ask your doctor questions about what types of medications are being prescribed. If your doctor is suggesting that you start taking some sort of pain medication or other prescription medication,
Right.
I would suggest you talk to your doctor about what the medication is, what the side effects are, what potential symptoms may be, whether there are alternative treatment methods, and ask specifically about tolerance. Is this something that I might become addicted to? Those are concerns you very well might have, and certainly I think worth addressing.
Right. And what you're saying, and I hear you loud and clear, is that narcotics have a place in medicine,
Sure.
obviously, and they, who wants to have surgery without that, right? And then also, I know we have viewers out there who are very pro medical marijuana because it can help people from a cancer standpoint, that type of thing. But from what I'm hearing from you, and what I have read online, it's all about education. Make sure you're educated. Make sure you're aware of the side effects. And like you said, your doctor tells you something, don't just accept it. Know your rights. Know what you're taking.
Right.
Okay.
I think very important.
Yes.
My work is such that nobody calls me with good news.
I feel bad for you. Hopefully today is a good day.
It is, absolutely. But when somebody calls me looking for my help, it's either because they've been arrested, often on some drug-related charge,
Right.
and many of the criminal clients that I represent are in that position because of some form of addiction or substance abuse problem.
Right.
That more often than not began with medication being prescribed for some injury or illness.
Right.
It just progressed to a point where they could no longer control it. And it leads to poor judgment, sometimes lands them in the criminal justice system. On the other side, I've got personal injury clients, or maybe representing families of somebody who has been tragically killed in an accident, work-related accident or otherwise. And sometimes they are the victim of a drug-related accident. More often than not, what I see is clients who have suffered a severe injury or illness, and then they start down that road with prescription pain medication.
Right.
And progresses into addiction.
It's almost like a spiral down, isn't
It is.
Yes. Just switching gears just a bit. We're talking about painkillers, we're talking about marijuana, but one thing that I know I've seen in my practice is drug interactions. And do you see accidents from that where people are taking different things and really don't know how they're interacting together?
I do. I see a lot of clients that oftentimes try to self-medicate for that reason, either because they may be dealing with a severe injury that they're trying to recover from. It may be that they don't have insurance and can't afford to go back to the doctor to get that new prescription or to get it refilled.
Right.
It may be that they're too busy with work and kids and family and responsibilities and can't get to the doctor. So sometimes, as a matter of convenience, they'll try to self-medicate and say, well, you know, my husband has these pills in the medicine cabinet, let me try that. And of course, you got the proliferation of information online.
Yes.
And as I think we all know.
Which is good and bad, is it not?
It is. But I think what happens, and I'm trying to teach my kids this.
Yes.
Anytime you have a question, typically the first place you go is Google.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And a lot of times you find good, reliable information online. Sometimes you find not reliable information online. And I've talked to a lot of doctor friends of mine who tell me that they have patients now trying to self-diagnose and self-treat based on what they find online.
Right.
Which is
dangerous.
Very dangerous.
Yes. Yeah, it is. It is for sure. Well, I'll tell you what, you have been a wealth of knowledge, and on behalf of the entire PlumbTalk team, I'd like to thank you for joining us. Now, people who are watching this and are like, I really want to find out more either about painkillers, medical marijuana, or may have even been injured in an accident of some type, where would you point them? How can they get a hold of you?
Well, they can contact me. I'd say the best place to go is visit our website, romanolowgroup.com. We've got information on there, and certainly there's a wealth of other medical resources online that talk more about some of what we've covered today.
Perfect. Well, thank you for joining us.
All right, well, thanks for having me.